Welcome back to the Mel K Show. I could have no better guest this week after everything that we're watching than my guest today. Colonel Macgregor is one of the voices out there that has not only been speaking truth the entire time that we have been in this information war, but has been on the front line saying that we really need to do a lot more as citizens of this country going forward than maybe we have in the past. Thank you for joining me, Colonel. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. For my audience, everyone probably knows who you are, but for those out there who might not, can you just tell a little bit about your background?
Well, to keep it short, because these things rapidly turn into epitaphs, and I'm not quite ready to be buried yet. So let's just say, I was a lifelong professional soldier. I graduated from West Point in 1976 after 5 years because I had to go to the Virginia Military Institute for a year. That's another sad story. Although I loved VMI, it was very rough in those days. Different world in 1971. Anyway, I served for 28 years, and I was very fortunate. I got to do a lot of interesting things. I spent most of my time as an armored cavalry officer, but I ended up serving at very high levels, knowing a number of very good people. I left in 2004 after I had spent about 2 years off and on helping to plan the advance on Baghdad in 2003. And I usually tell people there was never any plan to occupy the place because everybody understood occupation of a Muslim country by non-Muslims was suicidal.
Yeah.
And so there was no plan to do that. And I point that out and people are all shocked by it. But no, everybody understood that was a very dumb idea. The problem was that when the decision was made, nobody would stand up and say no. And when I indicated that I thought this was a mistake, I was invited to, devote my life to something other than national security. So I left. Anyhow, then I ended up working in business for a lot of the major defense industries and consulting firms, but always as an independent. Ultimately, Donald Trump found out about me, decided that I might be of some use to him. He was interested in bringing me into his administration, but towards the end, and after a long discussion in April of 2020, he said, well, I'm going to find a way to bring you in. And I was then nominated to be the ambassador to Germany. Now, the reason for that is that I do speak German, and I spent a year of my education, my 11th grade and high school year, I spent in Germany, northern Germany. And I subsequently ended up going back to Germany several times. And my graduate education was devoted basically to the subject of Russia's relations with Germany and Germany's relations with Russia. So I'm kind of a Europeanist with a minor in the Middle East. And I was simply interested in the Middle East because I was very interested in what the Russians did there under the Soviet Union. So anyhow, it didn't work out, but then he decided to put me in the Department of Defense, and he asked me to get us out of Afghanistan, quote unquote.
Right.
I did some research, and it was very clear to me from everyone I spoke to, had experience on the ground in Afghanistan, because that's a place I haven't been to, that the time to leave was the winter. Because in the winter, all the usual suspects who are busy taking shots at you are in the cave next to the goats and the stoves and staying warm. And the likelihood of anybody interfering with us was very low. And so I put this together. And of course, there was an outbreak of rebellion in Washington because the Uniparty didn't want to leave Afghanistan. In fact, they never want to leave anything anywhere ever, because everything turns into the money flow. How much money is in it for me? How do I profit from it? So they could care less about everything else. Unfortunately, the president buckled, as we know, he left. And so we only then recently left at the worst possible time of the year.
Right. Yeah.
But the same very, I would say, frankly, unimpressive senior officers who were, quite frankly, not terribly competent, that were there under Trump, were there under Biden. And I thought that President Trump had learned the lesson that the first thing he needed to do is get rid of all of them, which he didn't do. We'll see what happens the next time around. But the level of incompetence, corruption, complacency is very high in all of the federal bureaucracy, and the Department of Defense is no exception. Right. So anyhow, I think that's enough. Everybody's heard enough, so let's go on.
Now, what you brought up, I often talk about the Project for a New American Century and the document that they put out shortly before 9/11 that was about basically militarizing the world. It appears that was like Rumsfeld and Cheney and Wolfowitz and these people. And then subsequently, Wesley Clark comes out and he tells the story about we're going into 7 countries and that went forward. Well, it appears that the people that were involved then are still behind the scenes, if not the same ones now, and that they do not want to let go of that plan, though it appears to have been a giant failure and it's really hurting us. Is that what's going on? Is that the senior leadership in the foreign policy just can't reorganize and deal with the reality that we're living in now, and they're still trying to live in the past or what they wanted from that reimagining America's defenses? It just seems
Well,
like they're not dealing in reality.
well, that's a very important observation. And of course, I know Wes Clark, and on that occasion, what Wes Clark said was true. That was a plan. And it was really focused primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on the Middle East. And I think there were a lot of people that thought that they were going to make the world, particularly the Middle East, safe for Israel. They're still doing it. It's done the opposite. It's made it far more dangerous for Israel. It has stoked the fires of anti-Semitism. And I've been over this with my friends in the IDF. I've been to Israel several times. I absolutely strongly support and love the state of Israel. I think it's a very positive thing, but it's now become a very negative thing. And they've dragged themselves into a very dangerous situation. They're no longer just facing terrorist non-state actors in a place like Gaza. They're facing a region that is inflamed and angry, and we are seen as enabling it. Because historically, we've had a series of presidents that were always supportive of Israel, but they always exercised a certain amount of influence over them, saying, you've gone far enough, that's good, we're good, because they understood that in war, particularly if you're an Israeli, but anybody, what's your number one concern? Preservation of the state.
Right.
And the problem is now I think Netanyahu has lost sight of that. But that's one part of this. But then there's a larger dimension that I think a number of these people that are part of the New American Century cult, if you will, thought that they could ultimately usurp power and govern and rule the world using our financial system to bully people and our military establishment, which after 1991 looked to them as a wonderful instrument with which they could conquer everyone and anyone that got in the way. And of course, things have changed. You point out, do they realize that they're living in a different world? The answer, well, is no. They think this is 1991. They behave as though we have the armed forces we had then. They behave as though nobody can stop us. There's nothing else out there. So you're absolutely right. That's the biggest problem right now. And we're being sort of unconsciously dragged into confrontations with states that we've never had any bad relations with people we've never fought before. And why would we want to do it? But nobody ever brings that up because I think Americans have falsely concluded that war is something that happens on somebody else's soil. Wrong. We live in a different world now. War can visit us here on the North American continent. They better wake up. And we're not facing people in sandals and bathrobes and AK-47s and the occasional mine. You're now dealing with adversaries that have enormous military power. It may not be the same as ours, but it's huge. And they're willing to use it, and they've just about had it with us. So we see that we've also successfully precipitated the emergence of coalitions and alliances against us. You look at BRICS. What is BRICS? BRICS is a group of people that have said, we've had it. We don't want to be in your financial system. We don't want to be compelled to use your dollar. We want to do business on our own terms. So please leave us alone. Saudi Arabia, we've always depended on the Saudis as a stalwart ally. I mean, there may not be a formal treaty of alliance, but we have an agreement in place and have had that since Franklin Roosevelt. And now they're telling us if you Americans steal the $300 billion in the financial system that belongs to Russia, we will dump $750 billion of your treasuries overnight. Well, Mel, you lived in New York.
Yeah.
Your husband's a banker. What would dumping $750 billion of our treasuries do to us?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
we're
that
in a
is,
lot of trouble.
yeah, and that is war. That
Yes.
is the other thing. And then what you're saying about BRICS, see, what I see also, you said before about your background in Germany and Russia and studying that. And when I look at that, I think of Brzezinski and the Trilateral Commission and all these years of, the worst thing that could happen is Germany and Russia teaming up. And now not only do we have a situation where now it's China and Russia teaming up, but frankly, what it does appear that they've done to us is isolated us from the rest of the world, not the other way around. Not we're going to put sanctions on Russia, we're going to put sanctions here and there, and then they're going to have to bow to us. It appears the NATO nations, the US, UK, are actually isolating ourselves from the rest of the world rather than anything that they were proposing they were doing. And for me, I'm sorry, it seems like it's by design. They're not
Oh,
that stupid.
well, it's not a no. The people that signed on for this new American century are far from stupid. They're all extremely bright people. But then again, Lenin and Trotsky were extremely bright people. You don't have to be bright to get things right, and you don't have to be bright to get them wrong. And we've got a lot of bright people who've gotten a lot of things wrong for a long time because we had this terminal case of national narcissism. That we are the best, we're the greatest. Anybody that doesn't like us or doesn't go along with us, well, then they have to be bombed into submission or sanctioned into submission. We have destroyed our allies' economies.
Yep.
Talk about Germany. If I were a German right now, I'd throw us completely out of the country. I would fly to Moscow. I'd make an alliance, and I'd reopen Nord Stream 2. So, I said at the time, and I wrote a short memorandum for the president, before I left saying, this Nord Stream 2 thing, let's not overdo this. There are good reasons why these people are cooperating. It has nothing to do with politics. Germany profits from this. This doesn't make them hostage to Moscow. Moscow needs Germany as much as Germany needs Moscow. This is not unhealthy. We can deal with this. But no one would listen to that. And so now we've created the very thing. Once again, we were talking about this earlier in the Middle East. When this is over, whenever the current madness ends, right, there will be a Russo-German alliance. That has existed for most of the last 350 years. Both of the world wars were anomalies. That's what people don't understand. The Russians and the Germans were never enemies, and they're not enemies now. And we shouldn't be interested in making enemies. We should be interested in cultivating good relations and business. And this is the preeminent stupidity. Washington said repeatedly to Jefferson wanted us to join the French Revolution. I mean, that's like, put a gun to your head and pull the trigger. And Washington was smart enough to say, Tom, if we were to do such a thing, the Austrians, the Russians, the Prussians, the British, everybody is going to land on the North American continent to wipe us out. And we have nothing in common with these people executing thousands of people every month. That's not us. And he said, we will spread what we do by being a good example, by being prosperous. If we enrich ourselves and become wealthy and prosperous and we do good business with everyone, others will want to emulate us. They'll want to say, well, look, these Americans are doing really well. What's their secret? Maybe the Republic is a good idea. Well, this was the difference between Thomas Jefferson, the radical ideologue. Of course, once he becomes president, he sobers up. He doesn't behave that way. So there is hope for dummies when they become president to sober up. Not that, again, Jefferson was by no means stupid. He's another example of an extraordinarily bright man, but reached a lot of bad conclusions. The question is now, and this is something you mentioned earlier, you listen to the speeches at the Republican National Convention. And I was sitting next to someone, he wrote something on paper, handed it to me in the middle of a speech. I won't say by whom. And the word on the paper was boilerplate.
Yes.
What in the hell are we doing? It's not just an open border. I saw the ranchers that lived down near the border in Arizona, those two elderly people. It's wonderful to hear that. And everybody started chanting, build the wall. Well, I think we heard that before. In 2016. And what did President Trump do? Well, he built 300 miles. That was the one damn thing he had to do. That's why he was elected. Everybody wants the rule of law in this country restored. I haven't seen very many sheriffs show up at this convention. Somebody needs to tell the truth about the criminality. I was talking to one of your admirers just a few minutes ago. Her name is Nicole Tarantino. I don't know if you remember her, but she lived nearby. She said she was talking to you in an Irish pub a few years ago, and she said, "Oh yeah, you'll love Mel. She's great. She's on the right side." Well, Nicole was looking at locations for crimes, and I had sent her a picture of some terrible event that had happened in New York. She said, "My God, that's 100 feet away from where I work." Yeah. That's the problem. What are we going to do? Everybody wants to wage war overseas. For what? It doesn't make any sense. And instead, what we ought to be doing is worrying about what's happening here right now.
Right.
I'm not worried about the Islamists in the Middle East. What's coming through the border? I'm not worried about child trafficking in downtown, whatever it happens to be in the Middle East or somewhere else. I'm worried about it here. 500,000 children disappear every year. This is the United States of America. What's wrong?
Right.
Incredible. Right. Don't hear anybody talk about it, though.
No, and they won't. And if you do, you get silenced or put in the corner or called something. I mean, it's outrageous. Now, what you said just now about what we should have done, and you know that I often in speeches talk about George Washington when he wrote his farewell address, basically said America should always stay sovereign and not get involved in other countries' affairs, but not let anyone get involved in our affairs. And clearly we have a problem with lobbying in this country, not just for foreign countries, but for weapons manufacturers and for big pharma and all of that. At this point, to me, lobbying seems to be legalized bribery. That is probably the number one thing that makes our voices and our votes irrelevant. As much as anything else. So we're at a place, too, where the corruption in the vassal state of Washington, D.C. is off the charts and really needs to be dealt with. What are your thoughts about the lobbying industry and how it seems to have become a branch between us and the government where we're not even listened to? The money in politics is so out of control that I think it's the number one thing that makes the people's voices not heard.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, and I often say this to audiences, and since you and I are going to be in Alabama, I got to think about this. No one in my family, on either side, has voted for anyone who was not a Republican since 1861. So think about that. I'm a lifelong Republican, right, and I've had it. And I began listening to people in the 1990s like Ralph Nader. A lot of people dismiss Ralph Nader. Well, he's a crank or he's not mainstream or something else. But Ralph Nader said 20 years ago, Washington is occupied territory. It's occupied by corporations. And I started looking into it, and I think he was right. But now we have a larger problem, the one that you're talking about. It's not just corporations. It's not just industries, foreign governments.
Right.
And a lot of their agents are right here inside the United States. I mean, I read recently that this South Korean girl who's an immigrant who was born in South Korea has now been arrested on charges of espionage. Well, that's the tip of the iceberg. People complain to me all the time about the Chinese. And I said, what's your solution? Well, we have to go to war. I said, are you out of your mind? You don't go to war with China. You secure the border. You round up the illegals, not brutally. In fact, you don't round them up at all. Initially, you say you have 90 days to get out of here. If you're willing to leave legally, register with us on the way out. And when things improve inside our country, and this is for everybody out there that thinks we have a booming economy, we don't.
Right.
But when things improve, we'll consider you for reentry. But those of you who refuse to leave, we will incarcerate you and we will confiscate your property and throw you out, and you will never get back in. Now, that's what's needed. And you know as well as I do, we're losing policemen.
Oh, yeah.
I know people who have been policemen for years. They can't wait to leave, and they're the good policemen. Right. And we are replacing them with whatever we can find. And that's what's happening in the armed forces. We have a serious morale problem. We have an identity problem. People say to me all the time, well, I'm a patriot, this. And I say, well, what are you? And sometimes they'll say, well, I'm this, and then I'm hyphenated American. I said, no, we have to be Americans. Either you're an American or you're not. So get rid of that notion. And we have to unite. And we got to cast aside this business of Republican and Democrat, because as most of the members of Our Country, Our Choice, where I'm the CEO, will say, what makes the difference? Who gets elected? It doesn't matter who's elected. You get the same damn outcome. And they're right. And you're talking about the Republican National Convention and all this boilerplate nonsense with punctuated occasionally as the truth creeps in, like these ranchers from the Arizona border.
Right.
But it's all boilerplate crap. And the American people have had enough of that. Remember, originally, and I include myself in this group, I liked Donald Trump because he wasn't boilerplate. He blurted out the truth.
Yep.
We need the truth, not pablum. And we're getting too much pablum these days.
Right. Now, going forward, you mentioned something before that I say a lot. It appears that while we went the project of New American Century path, China went the project of the Belt and Road Initiative. And it seems that the Belt and Road Initiative is their military plan, if you look at it strategically in terms of ports, transportation. But what they did do is they went into countries all over the world and built ports, built refineries, built highways, built electricity and brought in electricity and other things, which, but to export also the Chinese Communist Party influence in all of those corridors, in all of those strategic places. So while we were like militarizing the world, they were actually going around the world and, like you said, exporting what their influence, their maybe communism or not, their strategy was basically to make sure that any transportation hubs that have anything to do with military conflict, that they have their foothold in there already. And it's so crazy because had we followed your path that you're talking about and done the exact same thing, gone around the world and helped countries evolve in all these sectors, well, we could have exported what America is: liberty, freedom, republic, values. And we didn't. And now we have to figure out how to catch up, because we cannot ignore the Belt and Road Initiative and the 130 countries that have signed on. And again, it's another situation where the powers that be and the fake media are telling us that we're doing something where it appears that we're isolating ourselves. We cannot ignore the progress that has been made all over the world, Africa and South America, by the Chinese. I would think that we have to go figure out a way to work with them, or we're going to be isolated on that front too.
Somebody said, and I don't know who it was, truth is the basis for all morality. Truth is also the foundation of accurate analysis. So let's pause and talk about China. There are no communists in China. It's time to stop talking about the Communist Party of China. I mean, the Chinese are preeminently capitalists. If you were going to call them something, you talk about state capitalism. It's really a form of what we normally in the West refer to as fascism. You have one party, and they're the elite. They run the country. Their principal platform is twofold: one, unity; two, economic sustainability; and three, protect China.
Yeah,
that's it. Now they're brilliant economic imperialists because they go everywhere in the world and they say, "Look, we'd like to do business with you." Well, we can't afford it. Well, this is what we'll do for you. We'll build X, Y, and Z. In 10 years, you got to pay us back. If you don't, then it belongs to us. What do you think about that? Okay, sounds good. And then they ask the question, the Americans, when they come here, they say that our human rights record is bad, that we're not sufficiently democratic, that we need to become a modern liberal democracy. And the Chinese say, we don't care. That's your business. They're not exporting anything. What they're doing is they're spreading their economic influence because they want to become preeminently in the world the richest country. And they understand that if you are the richest country, you can buy people. What have they done here in the United States? They buy people. Washington, everybody says to me all the time, Well, what do you think the real problem is? And why does this happen? I said, well, why don't you check where the money goes? Track the money flow. So that's China. Now, when you talk about them militarily, I have a big secret for everyone. They're terrible. They have always been terrible. If we supported a Japanese invasion of China, the Japanese armed forces today would go through the Chinese the same way they did in 1937. Okay? So let's stop fearing Chinese military power. That's a joke.
Right.
It's, look, they're just not very good at it, but they're very good at what you're describing. And now here's the other side of the coin that people lose sight of. Eventually, when you get too deeply in debt and you can't pay anything back, they leave. And that's what happened in Venezuela. And in Venezuela, the leadership down there needed help. So they couldn't get anything out of China. China said, well, you owe us billions of dollars. You haven't done anything. You refuse to take our advice. So we're leaving. We packed up our things, take everything, go home. So they went to President Putin in Russia and said, we need your help. We need support. And he said, what do I get for that? So they loaded up several planes full of gold. Gold. Venezuela has substantial gold mines. Shipped it to Moscow, and instantly security details showed up from Russia to protect the leadership in Venezuela. I mean, it's a transactional deal. It has nothing to do with ideology. Russia simply saw the opportunity to acquire vast sums of gold. They hoarded it and brought it into Russia. By the way, China has a lot of gold now. India probably has more gold than anybody. And one of the things that worries me is just how much gold have we got, Mel?
Right. Exactly. I keep asking and nobody has an answer. And where is it? Like, I mean, even because the Federal Reserve doesn't work for us. So, I mean,
no kidding.
so where is this gold? And they are acquiring it. And you know what? It's also the Philippines, North Korea, South Korea. I mean, everyone in the BRICS nations also are really trying and acquiring gold. And the scary part is we don't know what these people that are currently in Washington, D.C. or in Wall Street or the Fed, what they're doing at all. We have no idea. And the numbers they give us have been, they readjust them 2 months later without telling us. It just seems to be on a track. And it makes you wonder if these people, I keep saying our country's captured by a parent company that's running our country from above that is already done with America. I mean, it seems that
we can say one,
go ahead.
I think we can say one thing with absolute certainty. The governments that we've had now for at least the last 30 years have not been terribly responsive to the needs of the American people.
Right.
When people say to me, well, you're a professional soldier. Why are you against invading country X or country Y? And I said, well, let me tell you something. We think, $14 trillion on the fiasco in the Middle East and Afghanistan.
Right.
And it's still not over. What could you have done with $14 trillion? Could you have cured cancer? How many hospitals could you have built? What kind of security for this country could you have created along our borders and our ports? I mean, one of the things that I have said routinely to people, if you want to look at how you secure your border, go look at Israel, which is one of the reasons that, and I visited the area down near Gaza. I'm very suspicious of what happened down there.
Yeah,
because when I was down there and I saw the Israeli system, I visited there in February of 2020. And, I love going out and visiting the IDF units because the officers that run everything, the professionals, are superb. So anybody that tells me they're stupid, incompetent, or lazy, I mean, you're out of your mind. The second thing is I like the recruits. I mean, they want to do the duty. They're interested in performing their duty. And that's a good thing. We in the United States need to cultivate an attitude of service.
Yes.
I was listening to somebody explaining why he or she, it was a gentleman explaining why he did what he did. He became a millionaire by 35. And his whole life was ruined as soon as he became a millionaire. And he changed his religion and everything else. But he said he had an uncle and he admired his uncle because his uncle was very wealthy. So he set out to become very wealthy and then discovered, gee, I don't like this. I'm miserable. He went through a divorce. He lost his family, go on and on and on. I grew up in a family where there was a strong sense of obligation to the nation, to the community, even to the city where we live, Philadelphia, where my mother's family being almost 400 years. So we don't seem to cultivate that anymore. We desperately need it. And I like that about Israel because it's very strong there. At least it was when I was there. And I looked at the Gaza system, and when I heard about this, I just couldn't believe it. There was a cell of Israeli women. One of the things that the Israelis do is that they take people on the basis of their demonstrated abilities and they use them effectively.
Right.
So these girls were very bright. They became an intelligence cell, and their whole focus while they were on active duty was to look at Gaza, everything that happened there, what was going on there. And they claim they reported in great detail what was going on. And they saw these special vehicles, the gliders and everything else, and the practices were going on. Then I found out that the chief of Egyptian intelligence, and people don't understand, when I was there in 2020, it was very clear Egypt worked very closely with the Israelis because the Egyptians are not friends of Hamas by any stretch of the imagination. They see them as another dangerous, violent Muslim Brotherhood style military organization. Well, they told the Israelis, look, something big is coming. It looks like it's going to be on the 7th of October. And then you have this music festival with all these young people down near Gaza.
Right.
The question is, who the hell thought this up? So I am not convinced that this was, a surprise. And, it's different, though, from 73. There were a lot of indicators of what was going to happen in 73. And there was an excuse for not recognizing what was coming because they'd seen this rehearsed many times. Yeah. And that was an old Soviet practice. When I was on the Czechoslovak border, at the end of every troop rotation, or East German border, where I also spent some time, they would launch what looked like an offensive towards the west. They'd go towards the border a few kilometers, stop, turn around, declare an end to the operation, and go home. Mm-hmm. Well, the Egyptians were doing this sort of thing. So you never quite knew what was real and what wasn't for the Egyptians. And obviously that the real thing did happen. Mm-hmm. Now, having said all of that, again, this is different.
Right.
And, when I was there, if there was an Israeli soldier who was wounded by a sniper in Gaza, and within minutes, they knew who in Gaza had fired the weapon.
Right.
And they understood the tunnel issues. They showed me several. I was very pleased. And thing I kept saying was we should have this kind of expertise and capability on our border with Mexico, and for that matter, in many parts of our border with Canada and so forth. So to tell me that this was something they didn't see, and then after you go through this, what everybody, including me, thought was entirely justified is some response that you had to launch. I mean, the Israelis talk about restoring deterrence. And I absolutely said, they've got to go in and administer some kind of object lesson. But that's not what this was.
No.
This rapidly turned into this giant ethnic cleansing thing. And I said to my friends over there, aren't you with us? I said, of course I'm with you, but I don't support this. I said, the world doesn't support this. This is going to harm Israel. You're not going to benefit from this. Well, here we sit. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that didn't need to happen, and it's getting worse.
Right.
Because I have this terrible sinking feeling they're going to go after Hezbollah. And one of the things that was very clear to me is that everybody there understood in 2020, if you fight Hezbollah, it's to the bitter end.
Right.
This is not a halfway measure operation. And if you're going to do that, you don't want to be engaged anywhere else.
No.
They only have 6 million people, for God's sakes.
Right. And it's the size of New Jersey.
You have a limited manpower pool.
Right. And it's the size of New Jersey. Because people don't even realize how small the territory we're talking about is, and that it's not that difficult. And immediately when I saw that we were going that route, even before October 7th, I was looking at it and I said, they're going to want a port. When I was looking at the Belt and Road Initiative and I'm looking at everything, I'm like, they're going to want a port right there off of Gaza. And then next thing you know, they're building a $300 million port that, of course, sank. But, and I thought, what is this really about? Is it connecting the landmass?
I'm glad you brought that up because if this is any measure of what the United States Army can do, we're in a hell of a lot of trouble. Because that was
the world
task.
Watching this.
But, when you go back to the Belt and Road, let's understand something. We have always been in a perfect strategic position here in the United States. Let me explain why. If you look at Rome and how Rome starts as a village on the Tiber and eventually becomes what for the times is effectively a global power. Why? Because Italy is right in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Right.
Everything has to go through or come around to or by Italy. And this lasted for hundreds of years, well into the Renaissance, until, of course, 1492. And we know that everything changed at that point. Well, we are between the Atlantic and the Pacific. If instead of the stupid things we've been doing, if we invested in high-speed rail,
right,
and we developed port infrastructure in New York City, let's just go down the list: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston, New Orleans, Corpus Christi, and built high-speed rail from those ports straight across to Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, and so forth. We could beat the living hell out of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, because the Chinese know they have to move their goods that they're trying to sell everybody and services or whatever they're buying and bringing back through other people's countries. Right. Our great advantage was from the Atlantic to the Pacific, one language, one law, one people. And it seems like people have been trying for the last 30 years to destroy one language, one law, one people. We've got to get back to that. And then we need to invest in our country heavily. If we do that, people will not want to ship their goods from eastern Ukraine all the way across Central Asia, which is a very volatile region, to reach the Pacific. It's faster. We can build fast sea lift that'll cross the Atlantic in 5 days.
Right.
Boom. It's there. Straight across the United States and gone across the Pacific. You can get to where you want to go faster that way.
Yeah.
But nobody's thinking about that. That's strategic thinking. So instead of worrying about the Belt and Road thing, because whatever the Chinese do, it has problems. Let me tell you, they don't build the best stuff. There are people in Africa now looking at this stuff that was built 10 years ago by the Chinese. It was not very good. Well, the Europeans and the Americans told them it'll take us 2 years to build this. The Chinese say, oh, we'll do this in 6 months. Right. We'll be gone in a year. Well, they think that's great. Well, if you want it fast and you want it bad, you get it fast and bad. A lot of people are discovering that about Chinese construction and Chinese infrastructure. But the point is, instead of looking at China as this military threat, let's look at what they're really doing. And instead of trying to somehow or another ruin it, it'll ruin itself given time. They've got so many problems in China. Right. High youth unemployment, way above 20% of the youth. You know, I'm not surprised that Xi has had a stroke. I'm surprised he's lasted this long. He wakes up every morning in a nation of 1.4 billion people waiting to be removed. The Communist Party elite, as you call it, is scared because they can't provide the prosperity, the jobs, the things that the Chinese people want. And there are at least 3 to 4 versions of the United States inside China. Stop worrying about that. Let's look instead about us.
Right.
What are we doing? And we should be the world's leader in transporting goods and services, air and naval, and across this country. That's how you make people in the Midwest wealthy. You restore and reinvigorate the Midwest by building these high-speed rail lines. And then suddenly you can transport food. You can transport everything that you produce. And it can be done very rapidly, very quickly. Yeah. I get so frustrated because that's why we became a great power. Those are the things that were accidental. That's before we had a damn government that represented 50% of GDP. You know, go back to 1905, we were king of the world in steel, king of the world in agriculture. You name it, we did it faster, better than anybody else. And what was the percentage of gross domestic product that the government contributed? 1%.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. And I love what you're saying, because I've been in 30 states over the last 3 years and we drive a lot. It is a tragedy that we have thousands of acres of farmland completely abandoned. There are full towns all over America, from Ohio to Michigan to, I mean, everywhere, all the Midwest, that literally are abandoned. Big factories that, but the bones are all still there, but we've shipped everything out. And like you said, if we put the money back into this country, you could revitalize all of our farmland. You could revitalize all these abandoned factories all over the place. I mean, it really is a no-brainer to do that. And then the other thing you're saying, there's a huge market for helping Africa get to the level of having energy and everything, and everywhere all over the world. Then we export everything. From what I see, if we did what you're saying, America wouldn't need to import anything. We could
Well,
actually export everything.
if you look at Africa in particular, if you look at Central Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, it's a very short trip from Sub-Saharan Africa to the United States. The Gulf of Guinea is full of oil and natural gas. People have not been able to develop it to the extent that it should be because there's too much criminality. There's too much conflict and crisis over there. I think it can work out. And we should have an interest in that because it's closer to us.
Right.
You know, why go 6,000 miles to defend Taiwan that stole the microcircuitry industry from us? Well, they didn't steal it. We allowed it to go away. It goes back to Ralph Nader, and he was talking in his time about what today we call vulture capitalists. That's why Nebraska is empty and has nothing going for it anymore, because the vulture capitalists turned it into the disaster it is. And there are too many politicians happy to take the money and let their population rot. Look, we need a revolution in this country. I'm so tired of hearing people say, oh, do you think there'll be a civil war? There's not going to be a civil war, but there will be a revolution. At some point, the American people, I'm talking about Americans, you, I, other people that say, I'm just an American. I got a shirt was given me the other day by somebody, says across it, I'm just an American. I said, I want that.
Yeah.
I want that. I'm going to wear it. And he was shocked. So I went and got the shirt. We have to be Americans and start saying, well, what's in our interest?
Right.
And 99 times out of 100, it's not going somewhere else to do someone harm. Our greatness is not improved by bombing a hapless opponent. And the other thing, and back to this foreign policy issue that we have to understand, we've just about run out of weak opponents, Mel. Now you're dealing with major powers that have armies, air forces, navies, vast missile arsenals. And many of them do have nuclear weapons, or if they don't, they can build them relatively quickly. Right. So why would you want to give them an incentive to do so?
Exactly.
We don't want to do that.
Right.
You know, so, and they say, well, you know, Doug, you just don't get it. You know, you don't get it. And I say, you're right. I don't get it. Exactly. And I have a lot of my peers and a lot of friends that serve with me in the military, and they're all stuffing their pockets full of cash, pushing a lot of bad ideas, bad programs, bad policies, and bad equipment. And I don't like it.
Yeah.
It's got to stop. We got to move in fundamentally new directions. And I wish I was hearing that from the Republican National Convention, but I'm not. Right. Are you?
No, I'm not. And I'm not hearing anything about geopolitics at all, really. And one thing that did happen last week, it was very disturbing, that obviously not many people in America pay attention to. NATO had this insane meeting where, I mean, if you reading it, it felt like the Project for a New American Century. But I'm reading this NATO printout of all, everything that they were saying in their declaration after their, meeting last week in D.C., and I'm sitting there saying, oh, so they're planning to continue the endless wars for another 20 years that benefit nobody. And then, Orban went around. He went to meet with Putin, I believe he went also to Turkey, and then came here and met with Donald Trump shortly before the assassination attempt. But now the EU is saying they're going to boycott Orban. They don't want him involved. They're not going to listen to him. The only person on the world stage at this moment, again, that's talking about peace. We know that it was thwarted when Turkey and I believe Israel and other people tried right in the beginning of the escalation. But now Orban's talking about it. He's obviously meeting with Putin and Trump. So now the backlash is that he's a traitor somehow to who? I mean, that nobody's talking about peace, and this guy is and has a whole plan. And now all of mainstream media, both here and in Europe, is demonizing him again. It's unbelievable to me that peace isn't the first priority.
Well, the war party controls everything, unfortunately, right now. The same people that are controlling Zelensky and us and ultimately Netanyahu, because having spent plenty of time over in Israel, I can tell you not every Israeli supports this stuff.
Right.
There are a lot of them over there that say, this has gone too far. Uh, I think I think it can all end, but it needs to end with us
Yeah.
because it's up to us to step up and say, wait a minute, enough's enough. I was
Yeah.
called by a presidential candidate whose name I will not mention because I'm not, by the terms of my employment as CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, I'm not supposed to endorse anybody. So I don't. And he said, I want to end this thing in Ukraine. What's the first thing I should do? I said, sir. And he said, oh, don't call me sir. I said, no, there's always a chance you could be president. And if you are, then I'm going to call you sir. I said, sir, you have to suspend all military aid to Ukraine immediately. That's number one. Number two, you have to get all U.S. citizens in and out of uniform who are in Ukraine out. Then you have to offer humanitarian assistance and be willing to support negotiations for an end to the conflict. That's as much as you can do. Well, what if I fly to Moscow? I said, don't do that. They're not going to believe anything you say. Why should they? We've lied to them repeatedly about everything. We've demonized them. I said, no, do that. Wait for them to call you, because if you do those things, that changes everything. And there are plenty of Europeans that realize this is a catastrophe. Everything's turning against it. France is a place that historically has always been the bellwether. What happens in France spreads. And I think Metternich, the old Austrian foreign minister, said when someone in Paris sneezes, Europe catches a cold. Well, Europe is catching the revolutionary cold. It's beginning. Orban is the future, not the fools he's talking to. And again, I always mention Charles de Gaulle because Charles de Gaulle told everybody the truth about NATO. And Eisenhower privately agreed with him. Eisenhower thought that NATO shouldn't exist after 10 years if we did our job properly. And de Gaulle said, Europeans need to understand two things. The Americans don't live in Europe, and Great Britain is an island. He's right. He's right. The Europeans will come out of the funk, but it's going to be difficult, and it's going to take a little bit longer. The good news is that at least until this point, the Russians have exercised great restraint. I don't know how we would have responded if we had had in Mexico a foreign alliance arming and standing up and training Mexicans to invade and destroy America, how we would respond. Well, I think I know how we would respond. Right. We'd flatten the place. So, the point is, we need to do those things, and then we need to turn to our friend Netanyahu, who is not our friend, by the way, just say, listen, that's it. It's got to stop. Israel can't do this. It will not survive war with everybody in the region. And we can't compensate with enough military power to rescue you. Stop.
Yep.
Nobody wants to do that. But I think it needs to be done. It's in the interest, in my judgment, of the Israeli people as well as in our interest.
Right.
And then finally, we need to say, where's the big problem? It's here. It's in Washington. It's the people that are governing. They're the wrong people.
Right.
I can't be more blunt about it. And I'm not distinguishing Republican from Democrat. They're equally insane.
You can. And this is where we are right now. And Our Country, Our Choice, your group that you started, is the truth, which is right now the people of the United States, we the people, are both the problem and the solution, in my estimation, right now. And that we need to really go back to basics here and understand that we were supposed to all be invested in this country, and not putting the way that we treat the government is so upside down that the government is as if these people are above us, and people act like that. And instead of us being the oversight, us being eternally vigilant, us being involved on the local level, but on the state level and every level, there's just so much that the people can be doing and should be doing. And that's why I say, even if Trump wins in 2025, then it's the beginning of the work that we need to do, not people out there. And again, we are how we treat, how we look at politicians needs to be examined and reorganized or recalibrated. They are people that have a specific job, supposed to run the country. The Constitution lays out what their job is, and the rest of it we should be doing and we should be taking on. And I think that that's the real problem, is redefining what it means, not just to be an American citizen, but to serve this country with pride and everything else from your own backyard. So let's talk about our country, our choice, why you started it, what it does there, and what people can find when they visit and learn about what you guys are doing. Because this is the only way out, is through, I believe, us and our country and our choices.
There needs to be some truth in advertising. I did not found or start Our Country, Our Choice. Our Country, Our Choice was founded by investors, people with money, one in particular, who decided, and he was an immigrant, but came here legally 30 years ago. You know, he always points that out, and said, you know, things are going in the wrong direction. And we've all tried to alter it through elections. It hasn't worked yet. You know, it doesn't seem to work. And I think he was originally a big supporter of President Trump. And I think President Trump was elected because of people like him. And by the way, people like you, who said, look, we need a fresh start. We need a new direction. Here's a refreshing voice. Let's put him in the saddle. It hasn't quite worked as we'd wished, obviously. And everybody says, well, we'll win the election. And I shake my head and I said, you're going to have to deal with voter integrity.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big issues that we have at Our Country, Our Choice. And frankly, our view is one person, one ballot on the day of. I'm happy to open it up for 48 hours. We can do it for 2 days, over a weekend. Pick a weekend, do it then, be done with it. But you've got to show up in person.
Yep.
And you have to prove that you are a citizen of the United States. Most states, the law says you cannot vote in this state. I know that's true in Florida, unless you're a citizen of the United States. But we haven't been enforcing that. So those are very minor things, it seems, but they're not. They're killing us now for our failure to have insisted on this. And then the other thing is, you know, get rid of all this other superfluous online voting, early voting, absentee ballots for everybody. The absentee ballot was created during the Civil War to allow, hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting for the United States to vote. That's why we have it.
Right.
And that's all we need. And somebody says, well, what do you do about someone who's 90 and is ambulatory? I said, I'm sorry. I feel badly, but we can't make exceptions for everybody all the time, because you make one exception, next thing you know, well, I don't feel very good today, so I'll just sign the ballot and send it out. The voter problem, motor voter, you register and suddenly it spits out ballots. In so many states, these people aren't even citizens. They may be legal aliens. They may be illegal aliens. You don't know, but there's a ballot now that says this, and somebody goes and harvests the ballot.
Right.
We got to straighten this out if we're going to get anywhere. And I don't see anybody talking about it. They're all acting like, well, this is going to work out. No, I'm very concerned. I don't think it will.
Right. Yeah.
So our country, our choice says we need to unify across party lines.
Yes.
We need to become a third force.
Right.
Different. We need to be America first, but in practice. That means defend the borders. That means deal with the illegal immigration, the human trafficking, the child trafficking, restore the law inside our borders. We have to restore integrity to our elections. These things have to happen, or we'll simply lose the republic. It'll go out of business.
Right.
And effectively, what we've also now started talking about is that what do we want the next republic to look like? Because this one's in trouble.
Yes.
And if it can't be fixed, then we're going to have to build a new one.
Right.
And there are plenty of good Americans out there who can do this. And we have to embrace the people that say they're Americans. I don't care if they came 6 weeks ago, 6 years ago, or 600 years ago.
Right.
They're Americans. They're with us. But those people that say, well, I'm not so sure. I listen to people say, oh, well, things get tough here. I can always go back to where I came from. Good. Go. If you have no roots in this place, we don't need you. Right. We really have to emphasize that, because we desperately need unity.
Yes.
unity across the board.
Right.
And that's, I think, perhaps those things encapsulate our feelings. We also don't like, the sexualization of our children, the sort of perversions that are now popularized as okay.
Yeah.
Remember back in the 1960s, somebody wrote a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. And I had this wonderful first sergeant in the United States Army when I was serving back in the early 80s. And he was from Lower Alabama. We used to call it LA, only it was really Lower Alabama. And he'd look at the soldiers and say, listen up there. You heard about this. I'm okay. You're okay. Wrong. I'm okay. You're screwed up. He had the right idea.
Yeah.
And we have to get back to that. We have to say, no, there is right and wrong. There are things
Right.
that are more repugnant and reprehensible. We have to deal with them. That doesn't mean we're going to lock up everybody who, in the privacy of their home, wants to engage in sexual congress in ways that most of us wouldn't. That's not the point. But we have to protect our children. And
Yeah.
we have to protect the moral fiber of our country. Remember, I said, the basis for all morality is truth.
Yeah.
We have to get back to the truth. We've been lying to everybody in this government about everything.
Right.
This whole Ukraine war is a lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Vietnam was a big lie. We got to get rid of this business.
Yeah.
And until we stand up and say no more lying, the truth, this is it, however painful it may be, we're not going to get anywhere.
That's so my book that's coming out, Americans Anonymous, that's a big chapter, is that America's as sick as its secrets. And until we actually deal with the decades, it appears after the murder of JFK, we've just had one cover up after another cover up after another cover up. Nobody held accountable. I think that's the most frustrating thing for those of us that are fighting and do love this country is I'm sick of committee hearings. I don't really care about that. I know that there was sedition and treason and multiple other things committed by people that remain in power or even get promoted. Even what's happening right now with the Secret Service and the assassination attempt and all of this, we're not seeing people held accountable. We didn't see people held accountable for what happened in Afghanistan. And that's also a big part. Going forward, I think there has to be accountability. And, a lot of people just want to move forward. And I don't think we can move forward without making clear what you're saying, which is there have been decades upon decades of lies. And frankly, when I look into it, it's actually a very small group of people when you look at the country that are keeping these lies. And then they groom the people from the, Ivy Leagues or wherever to then come in and continue it. And that's not really America. That's not Americans. And like you said, I feel the same way. I feel like no matter how painful it may be to get all the truth out, it will heal the country and bring us together more than almost anything else if there is actual accountability and facts dealt with straight and head on. So I am hoping that through groups like yours and others that there is more of a movement, because also I was talking to and I'll end on this. I was talking to Scott Ritter about why there's no anti-war movement like there was even in Iraq, but certainly in Vietnam, because everywhere I go, everyone cannot believe that these wars are happening in 2024 where people are dying over land disputes. It doesn't make any sense. And yet, we're at this place where people just want to be like, okay, well, we're just going to go forward and things are going to work themselves out. They're not going to work themselves out. So the last thing I want to ask you is about accountability and going back to expose and right some wrongs. I do think that certain things do have to be dealt with. I don't want this cycle of like endless, special counsels and investigations that go nowhere. And like the whole Benghazi hearing still blows my mind and makes me angry. So going forward in terms of that, what are your thoughts on the past and the future? Because right now we're between past and future, in my opinion.
No, you're exactly right. I like to say that when we talk about make America great again, I try to tell people, look, you're not going to bring back the past. The past is over. We have to forge a new nation. That's where we are right now. That's very clear. We have to build a new nation. And that nation has to integrate the people that are here as one. Now, that means that if you don't want to be integrated as an American, then that's fine. It's your business. Leave. But we've got to get to that point. Part of that is identifying what's right and what is wrong. You're correct. and that is going to be painful. Andrew Jackson, who, by the way, was a Democrat, not a Republican, had it right when he took over, when he went to Washington, because he effectively disbanded most of the bureaucracy.
Right.
He let it go, and he brought in different people. And the only requirement was that that person be loyal to his agenda. And his agenda was an American agenda, a democratic agenda. It worked. Andrew Jackson was actually the first president of the United States who spoke English without a British accent. Very few people realize that. He also discarded the clothing of the day that was worn, including silk breeches, knee socks, buckle shoes, and so forth, because that was the fashion in Great Britain and Europe. Said, throw it out. We're Americans. That's not us. We need some Jacksonian thinking. And we need a Jacksonian house cleaning in Washington. And I don't see that happening yet. And you're not going to get there when you announce, as I think Donald Trump mentioned recently, well, I'm going to bring in Jamie Dimon as Treasury Secretary or something. Well, that's like inviting John Dillinger to manage your banking system. Why would you do that? In other words, let's just let it all go and stop drawing more poison from the poison well. And I hate to be blunt, but these Ivy League schools and service academies over the last 20 years at least, probably longer, have been producing poison.
Yep.
These people are the problem.
Yeah.
A friend of mine said, it used to be duty, honor, country. Right now it's duty, country.
Right.
This has got to stop. First is your country, first and foremost. So what does that country mean? And it's not a question of what do I get out of it?
Right.
What do I invest into it? We need to get back to that. It's going to happen, Mel.
I know.
But I think it's going to happen after we go under financially.
Yeah.
Because then people are going to have to ask hard questions. And then your opportunity for accountability will be real.
Yeah, and I hope that they do. I mean, we really have to. First of all, and I agree with you, that not only do we need a Jacksonian cleaning, but we also need a gigantic audit, because a lot of people, very few people have gotten very rich over a lot of decades. That is grand theft on a massive scale, and they continue to stay in that power. I believe that it will happen as well. I actually feel positive, but like you, there's a lot of work to do. And if we do take back the country in 2025, that is the beginning. Not some kind of victory. That is the beginning of the cleanup, and every American citizen needs to be a part of it. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm so grateful. Can you tell everyone where to find you and where to follow and get involved in Our Country, Our Choice as well?
Well, if you want to find out more about Our Country, Our Choice, go to Our Country, Our Choice, all one word.com. It'll take you straight to the website. And look at the videos that are posted and the things that are said there. And if you're comfortable with those things, I think most of your listeners will be.
Yeah.
By all means, join. Now, we do have something happening, as you know, Mel. It's not happened yet, but it's going to happen now mid to late August. It's taken a lot longer because it's required a lot of work. It's a new platform coming out called Republic. And Republic as a platform will be a free speech platform.
I know. I can't wait.
And we want that. And I've told people, some are staunch conservatives and so forth. I said, look, this free speech platform means Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro can fight it out. Okay? We're not banning anybody. And by the way, there are people on the left, if they want to be able to speak freely, they can do so. There are only two real important requirements. One, you have to love the United States. If you're going to go on this platform with the idea of destroying the United States or hating it,
right,
well, we'll toss you. But as long as you're an American, you love this country, you can come on and express any view that you want. And that's the way it should be under the Bill of Rights.
Exactly.
And then I think, secondly, no pornography.
Right.
But when you go to Our Country, Our Choice, you'll see we're organized around issues. And a lot of people will be interested in those issues. I encourage you to go look at it. One is Our Country, Our Children, which is really building up a head of steam. Great. We're trying to accumulate data under the leadership of Dr. Juliet Engel that will give the police, those that are interested, and government the opportunity to shut down some of these child trafficking rings. We'd like to stop it all, obviously.
I know.
And again, this goes back to your point on accountability. You can't release criminals into the population and jail the policemen. This has got to stop. It's insane. It'll take us down the road to total anarchy and chaos. We need real leadership. We don't need pablum and we don't need boilerplate. And thank you and others like you, Mel. And there aren't very many, but they're out there for telling the truth, however ugly it may seem. We need it.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I agree. Like I said, we have to start with truth as our most powerful weapon and use it wherever it's needed. And that's the beginning, is just being very honest with ourselves and everyone else about where we are and how we can go forward. And you have been on the front lines doing that. Thank you so much for your service and also for your leadership right now. Where there's a void of leadership, I really do look to you as one of the main voices out there that is still attempting to lead the way to a better future. And I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Mel.
Thanks.